Good morning. This is part two of the New Deal and the legacy of the New Deal. I have here a very, very rudimentary, very basic overview of the second part of the New Deal and the legacy of the New Deal itself. We'd established the other day that Herbert Hoover did not really ingratiate himself very well with the American public. He did not give the American public a feeling of satisfaction as far as the federal government tackling this unprecedented um, atrocity with the American economy. So Franklin Roosevelt, one of the biggest things that he did was that he, again, as I said the other day, continued to try, even though he didn't have a philosophy, he didn't necessarily have ideas that were completely radically different from what Hoover was doing. He was trying more things and willing to spend more money than Hoover was to try to alleviate the Great Depression. Now, as I have written here, the first couple of years made many Americans feel that the government was actively working to address their problems, but it didn't do much to end the Depression. If you look at the numbers themselves, the unemployment rates from 1933 to 1942, Roosevelt inherited an unemployment rate of 25%. 1934 was a little under 22%. 1935, it's 20%. In 36, when he's running for re-election, it's still at 17%. To give you a little bit of context, when we had the stock market crash in 2020 due to COVID, the unemployment rate went up to about 14%. When the Great Recession happened in 2008, 2009, the unemployment rate went up to about 10 to 11%. So 17% is still a terrible, terrible, terrible unemployment rate. It still shows that we are deep in a depression. When he's reelected, gets a little bit better as far as 14%, which is still horrible overall. But then 1938 goes back up to 19%, 17%. So although there's a lot of money being spent by the federal government, a lot of people being put back to work, that feeling of pride and satisfaction in themselves, the numbers are still there saying that this depression is not going away. If you look here ahead, 1941, 1942, down to 4.7%. If you could guess, it wasn't until World War II happened that we actually were lifted out of the Great Depression. We'll get to that in a little bit. So in his second term, Roosevelt is going to create more New Deal agencies. Actually, towards the end of his first term, he's going to begin this process. But as he gets into the end of his first term, into the beginning of his second term, his policies are going to shift leftward, become more liberal. Part of it is he's trying to address the complaints of people from the left, people like Francis Townsend, Huey Long, Charles Coughlin, and to try to basically overcome their negativity, overcome their complaints against him by kind of playing their game, if you will. So, in 1935, they passed the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. $11 billion spent to build airports, roads, buildings, funds actors, artists, authors. This is the New Deal agency that took slave narratives. So it's kind of hard to imagine now, but during the Great Depression, there were still people from the days of slavery who were still alive. And so what they did was they recorded their stories, which is a wonderful thing. And they're widely available online to hear directly from the former slaves themselves about their experiences in bondage. Part of the complaints about the WPA is that it paid artists to create art like this. This is a Jackson Pollock painting. This is considered to be extraordinary art. This is worth millions of dollars now. It's abstract art. I personally don't get it, but my wife does, and she tells me that I should too. In the second New Deal, you have, among other things, and I'm trying to paraphrase this briefly for you, the Wagner Act. So the Wagner Act was passed allowing for unions to collectively bargain, which means that unions can form and unions are groups of workers. Let's just kind of make this basic. And collectively bargain means that they can band together to negotiate with management. So there's strength in numbers here. And it also makes the maximum work week 40 hours. And again, going over that would require overtime pay. They passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, establishing the very first minimum wage and banning child labor. In 1935, at the end of his first term, Social Security is passed. This is old age pensions for people 65 or older. This was addressing Francis Townsend's concerns. What this does is gives older people a monthly income from the federal government, and when they're going to retire from their jobs, it's going to open up new jobs for younger people to fill them. It also gives unemployment insurance and aid to families with dependent children and people with disabilities. Also, during this time, you're going to see the number of people with access to electricity greatly skyrocket. 12.6% of rural people had electricity in 1935, and by 1949, 90% of them have it. So their lifestyle is greatly enhanced, and they can have the New Deal to thank for that. Well, going back to the numbers here, in 1936, 37, Roosevelt concocted his Supreme Court packing scheme where he was attempting to add 6 new justices to the Supreme Court. That failed. And after that failed, there's going to be a coalition of Southern Democratic conservative senators that are going to permanently be against Roosevelt's New Deal policies. And they're going to have a lot of Republicans that are going to see eye to eye with them on this. Roosevelt's power after 1937 is not nearly what it was prior to, and that courts packing scheme was a division point in his power. 1938, the reason that the unemployment rate goes back up to 19%, they call this the Roosevelt recession. It would be a depression, really. Is Roosevelt himself did not like the idea of a non-balanced budget, and he's spending money like crazy to fix this Great Depression. Well, he hasn't had he doesn't have the support of the senators the way that he once did, so he's got to rein in spending. Um, and when he reins in spending, the government's not spending what it was. A lot of people go to work, and obviously the economy doesn't take that too well, and it shoots back up to 19%. It shows or it illustrates just how much the American economy was depending now on government spending. All right, so let's go here to the legacy of the New Deal. All right, so legacy is how something is remembered, and the New Deal itself is remembered differently by different people, obviously. So we'll try to hit both sides here of the debate once it loads. Okay, because of the New Deal, the president gains a more active role in shaping the economy. There's a time, historically speaking, where if there's a problem, you don't look to the president to fix your problem. You might look to the state governor to fix a problem, or you might look to a mayor or a local government to fix it. But mostly people look to themselves. I mean, a lot of people when the depression happened at the beginning were blaming themselves for being out of work. You know, if I was a more competent worker, if I was more qualified, I wouldn't be suffering. My family wouldn't be suffering with me. But the reality is here is through all this New Deal legislation and the president being much more activist, they have a much bigger role in the American economy going forward. A lot of large businesses are going to be regulated. The SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, is going to regulate the stock market, the among other things, so to make sure that speculation doesn't happen in the way that was happening in the 20s that helped lead to the stock market crash. FCC, Federal Communications Commission. There's all kinds of different regulatory groups out there trying to regulate big business. Trust in banks is restored through things like the FDIC, which gives insurance for deposits. Allows for wide scale unionization with the Wagner Act. You have the minimum wage established. Social Security, that may be for some people the biggest legacy of the New Deal, getting old age insurance for people 65 and older. It is one of the more popular government agencies to this day. Electricity across the country, especially in rural areas. Forests are planted all across the country. National parks are expanded and improved. Now, to the negative, the national debt skyrockets. Deficit spending becomes much more the norm. Deficit spending means we spend more, the government spends more in a year than we make in tax revenue. So there's more money having to be borrowed in order to pay off what we owe, and a much more powerful federal government in general. So, opinions. If you're a conservative, you might believe that the New Deal made the government too large and too powerful. It makes people too dependent on their federal government versus themselves. Liberal critics believe that FDR didn't do enough to eliminate economic and social inequalities. They believe that the government could have done more. But keep in mind, from Franklin Roosevelt's perspective, this is the age where dictators are rising in Europe, people like Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, and Roosevelt was sensitive about the critics claiming that he was seeking total authority. So he did do much more than he set out to do as far as liberal policies, but for some it wasn't enough. And then here I put many believe that extreme measures were necessary to save capitalism in the U.S., that without doing some of these extreme things with growing the size of the government, that the country itself could have imploded. And Roosevelt is regarded by many as one of the most influential presidents in U.S. history. Love him or hate him, Franklin Roosevelt definitely left a mark on our country. And to this day, he is widely regarded as one of our most influential presidents, and in many opinion polls, as one of our best presidents. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. If not, have a fantastic day.